Thieves targeted a black widow in the woods. They didn't know she was a legendary snipe. The woman lived deep in the woods, far from the noise of towns and busy roads. Her cabin stood between tall trees, hidden by thick bushes and winding paths that only locals knew. From the outside, the place looked ordinary: old wooden walls, a small porch, and smoke rising from the chimney on cold mornings. But people in nearby villages spoke about her in low voices. They called her the Black Widow. No one remembered exactly who gave her that name. Some said it was because she lived alone after losing her husband many years ago. Others believed it was because she never smiled much and always kept her distance. She dressed simply, walked with purpose, and rarely spoke more than a few words. She was polite but distant. She never explained her past, and she never corrected the rumors. Every few weeks she would come into town early in the morning. She bought only what she needed: flour, tea, vegetables, oil. She paid in cash, thanked the shopkeeper, and left. She never stayed to talk. Children watched her quietly. Older people nodded with respect, though they did not know why. There was something about her presence that made people lower their voices. After her shopping, she always walked back toward the woods instead of driving. Even in bad weather, she chose the long forest path. Her steps were steady and light. She listened as she walked. Birds, wind, broken twigs, nothing escaped her attention. To anyone watching closely, it would seem she was not afraid of the forest at all. In fact, she moved through it like someone who knew every sound it could make. Years earlier, she had not planned to live this life. Her past was very different, filled with strict routines, long days, and heavy responsibility. But those days were behind her now. She had chosen a quiet life, away from attention, away from noise. The woods gave her peace. They asked nothing from her. At night, her cabin stayed dark. No bright lights, no music, just the soft glow of a lamp by the window. She read books, repaired tools, and sometimes sat silently, listening to the night sounds. She slept lightly, waking easily if something changed outside. It was a habit she never fully lost. Not far away, in another part of the region, a group of thieves had begun searching for easy targets. They were not strangers to trouble, but they preferred simple work. Empty homes, isolated places, people who looked weak or alone. They watched towns, farms, and roads. They looked for patterns. One of them noticed the woman first. He saw her walking alone with groceries, disappearing into the forest. No car, no company, no guards, just a single woman carrying bags. He mentioned it to the others. They laughed at first, but the idea stayed. Over several days, they watched from a distance. They saw her come and go at the same times. They saw no visitors, no animals guarding the place, no signs of wealth, but isolation itself was valuable to them. They assumed she kept savings at home. They assumed she was afraid, careful because she was alone. They assumed wrong. What they didn't notice were the details that mattered. The way she stopped without turning her head. The way she changed her path slightly each time. The way she never walked directly home if something felt off. They mistook awareness for nervousness. To them, she was just a lonely woman hiding in the woods. To the forest, she was someone who understood its language. On one afternoon, as clouds gathered and the wind picked up, the woman paused on her way back from town. She felt something was different. The air felt heavy. The birds were quieter than usual. She did not panic. She simply waited. After a moment, she adjusted her path and took a longer route, one that passed higher ground. From that position, she saw faint movement far below. Not clearly, just enough to confirm her instincts. She memorized the shapes, the spacing, the direction. Then she continued walking as if nothing had changed. Back at her cabin, she locked the door and placed her groceries away. Her movements were calm, unhurried. She made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the woods slowly darkened. She did not feel fear. She felt focus. In another part of the forest, the thieves finalized their plan. They believed night would give them cover. They believed the woman would be asleep. They believed silence meant safety. They did not understand that silence can also mean readiness. As night settled over the trees, the cabin light went out. The forest looked still. But the woman was awake, listening, waiting, patient as the woods themselves. And somewhere between the shadows and the wind, the first mistake was already being made, by those who thought they were hunting, when in truth, they were stepping into the territory of someone who never needed to prove who she was. Men did not rush. They believed patience was the key to success. From a small rented room near the edge of the forest, they talked quietly and planned every detail. They had learned over the years that mistakes happened when people became careless. This time they wanted everything to be smooth, silent, and quick. There were 4 of them. Each had a different reason for doing what they did. One wanted fast money. Another believed the world owed him more. The third followed because he had nothing else. The fourth liked the feeling of control. Together, they convinced each other that they were smart and careful. They told themselves they were not cruel people, only unlucky ones making practical choices. They spread out a rough map on the table. One of them had drawn it from memory after watching the woman's path several times. He pointed at the cabin's location and the narrow trails leading to it. No nearby houses, he said. No lights at night, no visitors. She lives alone. They agreed the forest worked in their favor. Trees blocked sound. Darkness hid movement. They assumed she would be scared if surprised. They imagined her freezing, not knowing what to do. That thought gave them confidence. What they did not discuss was her past. They did not ask why someone would choose such a place to live. They did not question why she never seemed lost in the woods. To them, quiet meant weak. Solitude meant helpless. Over the next few days, they watched more closely. They noticed she always returned home before sunset. They noticed her lamp went out early. They noticed her cabin door faced east, not toward the main trail. They believed these were signs of fear. In truth, they were choices made with care. The woman, meanwhile, continued her routine. She chopped wood, cleaned her tools, and repaired a broken fence behind the cabin. On the surface, her days looked ordinary, but inside, her senses were sharp. She felt the change in the forest. Sounds carried differently. Some footsteps did not belong. She never told herself stories that could distract her. She trusted facts, and the facts told her she was being watched. Still, she did not act quickly. Acting too soon could reveal her awareness. Instead, she allowed time to pass. She wanted to understand who they were and how careless they might be. She wanted to be certain. At night, she sat quietly listening. Wind moved the branches, but beneath that, there were pauses that felt wrong. The forest had a rhythm she knew well. When that rhythm changed, it meant someone unfamiliar was nearby. One evening, far from her cabin, the men practiced their approach. They whispered, argued, then agreed again. One wanted to move fast. Another wanted to wait longer. In the end, they decided on a cloudy night when the moon would offer little light. They believed darkness belonged to them. They packed light, simple tools, gloves, no noise. They told themselves this would be over quickly. They joked softly to hide their nerves. The woman noticed the cloud cover long before nightfall. She adjusted her plans. She cooked earlier, cleaned carefully, and prepared the cabin as she always did. Nothing looked unusual. If someone were watching, they would see nothing but a quiet evening. But inside the cabin, her mind was clear and steady. She reviewed her surroundings in memory, every tree, every slope, every place where sound traveled faster or slower. This was not fear. It was awareness shaped by long experience. As darkness settled, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The thieves moved carefully, stepping where leaves were thinner, stopping often to listen. They felt confident at first. Everything seemed calm, too calm. One of them felt uneasy and whispered that something felt wrong. Another laughed quietly and told him not to imagine things. "She's just a woman," he said. "She won't even hear us." The woman heard them long before they reached the cabin. She did not move toward them. She did not rush to confront them. Instead, she changed her position. From a higher point near the trees she could observe without being seen. She stayed still, letting them come closer. The thieves reached the edge of the clearing and paused. The cabin stood silent. No light, no movement, just shadows and wood. They felt relief. One of them smiled. This was easier than expected. They stepped forward, unaware that every move they made had already been noted. The woman watched quietly, her breathing slow, her thoughts calm. She felt no anger, only focus. She had left that kind of life behind her, but she had not forgotten who she was. As the men crossed into the open space, one of them slipped on loose ground and caught himself just in time. The sound was small, but it was enough to break their confidence. They froze. Nothing happened. They told themselves it was nothing, but the forest had already chosen a side. The woman remained unseen, patient, and alert. She did not need to rush. Time was working for her. And as the men moved closer to the cabin, believing the night protected them, they did not realize that every step forward brought them deeper into a place where control no longer belonged to them. The forest did not change suddenly. It changed slowly, in ways only someone experienced would notice. The wind shifted direction. Leaves stopped moving for a few seconds, then rustled again in a different pattern. Small animals went quiet, not all at once, but one after another, like lights turning off along a road. To most people, these details would mean nothing. To the woman, they meant everything. She stayed still, blending into the shadows, letting the night do its work. Her body felt calm, balanced, steady. She did not feel excitement or fear. She felt clear. Every sound reached her ears, but she chose which ones to keep and which ones to ignore. The forest was speaking, and she understood its language. The men moved closer to the cabin, careful but unsure. Their confidence had begun to fade, though none of them wanted to admit it. Each step felt louder than the last. Every snapped twig made their shoulders tense. They paused often, listening, trying to convince themselves that the silence meant safety. One of them whispered that he felt watched. Another shook his head and told him to focus. "It's just nerves," he said. "We're almost there." But his voice was not as steady as he wanted it to be. From her position, the woman observed their spacing and movement. She noticed how they clustered together when unsure, then spread out again when they felt braver. She noticed which one led and which ones followed. She noticed the small habits, who looked back too often, who stepped without checking the ground, who breathed too loudly when anxious. She did not judge them. She did not feel hate. She simply observed. She changed her position slightly, moving in a way that made no sound. Her steps were placed carefully, using the natural cover of the forest. She knew where the ground was soft and where it was firm. She knew which plants bent quietly and which ones snapped. This knowledge had come from years of walking these woods, not from maps or plans. The men reached the edge of the clearing again. The cabin stood dark and silent just as before. No movement, no light, no sign of life. It should have made them feel relieved. Instead, it made them uneasy. One of them suggested waiting a little longer. Another argued they were wasting time. The discussion was short and tense. In the end, they agreed to continue. They told themselves the silence meant the woman was asleep or gone. The woman noticed how their voices changed when they whispered. She noticed the tension building between them. Fear had begun to replace confidence, and fear often caused mistakes. She made a small change in the environment, not something obvious, not something sudden. A gentle shift of position, a slight disturbance of leaves far from her actual location, just enough to create doubt. The men stopped. One turned around, scanning the trees. He saw nothing, but his heart was beating faster now. "She's not alone," he whispered. "Stop," another said sharply. "You're imagining things." But imagination and instinct are close cousins, and his instinct was shouting now. The woman remained unseen. She did not want to scare them into panic. Panic made people unpredictable. She wanted them cautious, slow, uncertain. She wanted time. She remembered another place, another time when patience mattered more than speed, when waiting had saved lives. Those memories stayed with her not as pain but as lessons. She adjusted again, moving to higher ground where she could see the cabin roof and the clearing clearly. From here, she could track every movement without being exposed. Her breathing stayed even. Her muscles were relaxed but ready. The men took a few more steps. One of them nearly tripped again, and this time he let out a quiet sound before catching himself. The others froze. They stood very still, listening. The forest answered with silence. That silence pressed against them, heavy and uncomfortable. It made them feel small, as if the woods were watching, waiting. The woman watched their faces, faintly visible in the low light. She saw the doubt. She saw the hesitation. She saw the moment when confidence cracked. She knew then that she had control. Still, she did not reveal herself. She did not need to. Control did not always mean action. Sometimes it meant allowing people to face their own fear. One of the men suggested leaving. He said this was not worth it. The leader hesitated. Pride pulled him forward, but instinct pulled him back. He looked at the cabin again, trying to see signs of weakness. The woman noticed his hesitation and made another small change. A sound, carried by the wind but not from where she stood. It was enough to suggest movement without confirming it. The men reacted immediately. They turned toward the sound, hearts racing. One whispered a warning. Another clenched his fists, unsure what to do. Nothing followed the sound. No figure appeared. No voice spoke. That uncertainty was worse than anything they had expected. The forest seemed larger now, darker, closer. The trees felt like walls. The path behind them no longer felt safe. They were caught between moving forward and turning back, unsure which was worse. The woman remained calm. She did not enjoy this moment. She did not feel powerful. She felt responsible. This was her home. These woods were her chosen place of peace. She would protect them without unnecessary harm. She thought about how easily things could have gone differently if the men had chosen another path in life. That thought did not soften her resolve, but it kept her grounded. As the men argued quietly again, she decided it was time to end the uncertainty. Not with fear, but with clarity. She changed position one last time, choosing a place where she could be heard but not seen. She waited until the wind settled. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear, not loud, not threatening, just certain. "Leave," she said. The word carried through the clearing, simple and unmistakable. The men froze. They looked around wildly, trying to find her. They could not place the sound. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "She's awake," one whispered, panic rising. The woman said nothing more. She did not need to. The forest returned to silence, but now it was a silence filled with meaning. The men stood there, shaken, realizing that they had not been unseen. They had never been in control. And whatever they believed about the woman in the cabin, they now understood one truth clearly. They had entered a place where they were outmatched, not by force, but by someone who knew exactly when to speak, and when not to. And in that moment, the woods felt alive around them, not as a threat, but as a quiet witness to a mistake they would never forget. The men did not move right away. The single word they had heard stayed in the air longer than it should have. It was not shouted. It was not angry. That was what frightened them the most. It sounded calm, like someone giving a simple instruction they expected to be followed. They looked at each other, eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. One of them slowly turned in a full circle, searching the trees, the ground, the shadows. He saw nothing. No shape, no movement, no light, just the dark forest and the silent cabin. "This isn't right," one of them whispered. His voice shook despite his effort to control it. "She knew we were here." Another tried to answer, but the words would not come out properly. His mouth felt dry. His heart was beating too fast. He had never felt so exposed before, even though no one could see him. The leader raised his hand, signaling them to stay quiet. He listened carefully, hoping to hear footsteps or breathing. There was nothing. The silence felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. It made him feel smaller than he wanted to admit. They had planned for fear from the woman, not from themselves. A few moments passed, then more. The forest remained still. No second warning came, no threats followed. That calmness made the situation worse. It suggested control. It suggested confidence. The woman had not moved closer. She had not rushed toward the cabin or toward them. She stayed where she was, unseen, watching. She had learned long ago that people revealed more about themselves when they believed they were alone with their thoughts. The men began whispering again, arguing in low voices. One insisted they should leave immediately. Another said they had already come this far and turning back would make everything feel pointless. The leader felt torn. Pride pushed him forward. Instinct pulled him back hard. He tried to think clearly. He replayed the voice in his head. It had not sounded frightened. It had not sounded surprised. It sounded like someone who had expected this moment. That realization settled heavily in his chest. The woman shifted her weight slightly, careful not to make a sound. From her position, she could see how tightly the men were grouped now. They no longer spread out. Fear had pulled them together. That told her everything she needed to know. She did not want this situation to grow worse. She wanted it to end without anyone getting hurt, without chaos, without regret that could not be undone. She had learned long ago that real strength was knowing how to stop something before it crossed a line. She spoke again, her voice steady, carrying just enough to be heard. "You've been seen," she said. "You've been noticed. There is no reason to stay." The words were simple. Honest, clear. The men reacted immediately. One stepped backward without meaning to. Another grabbed his arm, trying to steady him. The leader swallowed hard. He felt something close to shame rising in him, mixed with fear. "How?" one of them whispered. "How did she know?" No one answered him. The woman did not explain. She did not need to. She had nothing to prove. She had already said enough. The men stood there, unsure of what to do next. They waited for something more, an appearance, a threat, a demand, but nothing came. The silence returned, firm and complete. That silence made the decision for them. The leader finally nodded. "We're leaving," he whispered. His voice carried no argument now, only acceptance. They began to move back the way they had come, slowly at first, afraid of making noise, afraid of triggering something unseen. Every step felt watched. Every breath felt too loud. The woman tracked their movement easily. She noted their path, their pace, the direction they chose. She stayed hidden, letting them go. She did not follow closely. She did not chase. She simply made sure they were truly leaving the area. When they reached deeper into the forest, far from the clearing, the tension finally broke among them. One cursed under his breath. Another stopped and bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to calm his breathing. "We should never have come here," one said. No one disagreed. They did not realize that while they were retreating, the woman had already made another quiet choice. Protecting her home meant more than just sending them away. It meant making sure they did not return, and that others would not try the same thing. She moved carefully toward her cabin, taking a different route than usual. Once inside, she closed the door and secured it. Then she reached for an old phone she kept powered and ready, even though she rarely used it. Her call was short and calm. She described what she had observed. She gave details, locations, timing, movement patterns. She spoke clearly without emotion, the way she always had when sharing important information. The voice on the other end listened closely. "I understand," the person said. "Stay where you are. We'll handle it." She thanked them and ended the call. Outside, the forest slowly returned to its natural rhythm. The birds began to move again. The wind shifted gently through the trees. It was as if the land itself was relaxing after holding tension for too long. The woman made herself tea and sat by the window, watching the darkness. Her hands were steady. Her thoughts were clear. She felt no rush of victory, no thrill, only relief that the situation had been resolved without unnecessary harm. Hours later, faint sounds echoed in the distance, vehicles on a far road, voices carried by the night air. The woman did not go outside. She did not need to. She trusted the process she had set in motion. The men, meanwhile, were stopped long before they reached safety. Calm voices, clear instructions, no shouting, no chaos. They were guided away, their confusion evident. Questions were asked, answers were given. The forest was left behind. By the time the first light of morning touched the treetops, everything had settled. The woman stepped outside her cabin as the sun rose. Mist hovered low over the ground. The air smelled clean and cool. She took a deep breath, feeling the calm return fully. She walked the edge of the clearing, checking the ground, reading the marks left behind. Not out of anger, but out of habit. She believed in knowing her environment completely. When she finished, she returned to her porch and sat down, watching the woods wake up. She thought about how easily people judged what they did not understand. How often quiet was mistaken for weakness. How often strength chose to remain unseen. She did not regret her past, but she did not miss it either. She had earned this quiet life. She had chosen peace, and she would protect it in her own way. As the sun climbed higher, the forest looked ordinary again. Just trees, light, and shadow. Anyone passing by would see nothing unusual, but the woods remembered. And the woman, known by rumors as the Black Widow, remained what she had always been, not a legend seeking attention, not a threat looking for trouble, but a calm presence who knew exactly who she was, and exactly how much strength it took to live quietly and keep that quiet. Safe. Morning arrived slowly, like it often did in the woods. Pale light slipped between the trees, touching the cabin roof and the damp ground. Mist floated low, softening every shape. The forest looked peaceful again, as if nothing unusual had happened during the night. To anyone passing by, it would seem like just another quiet place, untouched and calm. The woman stepped outside her cabin and stood still for a moment. She breathed in the cool air and listened. Birds were calling again. Somewhere, water moved gently over rocks. The forest had returned to its natural rhythm, and that told her everything she needed to know. The danger had passed. She walked slowly around her cabin, checking the ground and the trees nearby. She did this not because she was worried, but because it was her habit. She believed in awareness, in understanding her surroundings fully. She noticed faint marks on the soil where feet had stepped, broken twigs, disturbed leaves. Nothing more. Nothing that could not be forgotten by time and rain. When she finished, she returned to the porch and sat down with a cup of warm tea. The steam rose gently and she wrapped her hands around the mug. Her movements were calm, unhurried. Inside her there was no storm of emotions, only quiet thought. She reflected on the night without replaying it too much. She had learned long ago that holding onto moments like that gave them more power than they deserved. What mattered was that no one was hurt, and her home remained safe. In the nearby town, life continued as usual. People went to work, shops opened, and conversations flowed as they always did. A few people heard small bits of news, nothing dramatic, just that some suspicious activity had been stopped near the forest. No names were mentioned. No stories spread. It passed quickly, replaced by everyday concerns. The men who had entered the woods did not speak about what happened, not to each other and not to anyone else. They carried the memory quietly, each in his own way. What stayed with them was not fear of punishment, but the feeling of being completely seen without ever seeing who watched them. That feeling followed them longer than they expected. The woman knew none of this, and she did not need to. She did not seek recognition or acknowledgement. She had never wanted her past to define her present. She had done what she believed was right, and that was enough. Later that day, she worked in her small garden behind the cabin. She knelt in the soil, pulling weeds and checking the plants. Her hands moved with care, the same care she brought to everything she did. Gardening helped her stay grounded. It reminded her that growth took time, patience, and quiet effort. As she worked, memories surfaced gently like leaves floating on water. She remembered years when her days had been loud and fast, filled with commands, movement, and responsibility. Back then, silence had been rare. Now, silence was her chosen companion. She had not run away from her past. She had completed it. When the time came to step away, she did so without bitterness. She carried her skills with her, but she no longer carried the weight that came with them. In the afternoon, she walked a familiar trail deeper into the woods. This path led to a small clearing where sunlight fell freely. She often came here to think. Today, she simply stood and watched the light move across the ground. She thought about how people often misunderstood strength. Many believed strength was loud, visible, and forceful. They believed it needed to be proven. She had learned otherwise. True strength, she knew, was quiet. It knew when to act and when not to. It did not demand attention. The name people had given her never bothered her much. Black Widow was just a word built from guesses and fear of the unknown. She did not accept it or reject it. She simply lived beyond it. As the days passed, nothing unusual happened. The forest remained calm. No strangers returned. The path stayed quiet. Time did what it always did. It smoothed edges and softened memories. The woman returned to her routines fully. She went into town when needed, walked her paths, and kept to herself. People still watched her quietly, still whispered sometimes. But now and then, someone looked at her with a little more respect, though they could not explain why. One afternoon, a young woman at the market thanked her for waiting patiently in line. The woman nodded and smiled faintly. It was a small moment, but it mattered. It reminded her that quiet lives still touched others in simple ways. Back at the cabin, she sat by the window as evening settled. The sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. She lit her lamp and opened a book, though she did not read right away. Instead, she listened to the familiar sounds of night. She felt content, not happy in a loud way, not proud in a way that demanded recognition, just content. Somewhere beyond the forest, the world moved quickly. People chased noise, attention, and power. But here, among the trees, life moved at a human pace. Here, she could breathe. She thought briefly about the future. She did not plan far ahead. She believed in being prepared, not worried. Tomorrow would come, and she would meet it as she always did, with awareness and calm. Before going to bed, she stepped outside once more. The stars were visible through breaks in the trees. She looked up at them, feeling small in a comforting way. The universe did not care about names or stories. It simply existed. She returned inside and closed the door gently. In the woods, the trees stood tall and silent. They had seen many things over the years. They would see many more. But this place, this moment, belonged to quiet. The woman lay down to sleep, her mind at rest. She knew that if trouble ever came again, she would be ready. Not because she wished for it, but because readiness was part of who she was. Yet she hoped it would not come. She had chosen this life for peace, and peace had chosen her in return. And so the story of the Black Widow ended not with noise or drama, but with a steady heart, a safe home, and a quiet forest that held its secrets close, just as she did.